Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching 90 Day Fiancé. Let's get to the show. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, don't use YouTube as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. Let's watch the show.
Just help me.
I don't remember the last time a girl gave me flowers.
I guess now when people don't want to give flower because you not help.
What?
Why I do all for waiting myself?
Okay, so we're hearing that she's frustrated, that she has to do the wedding all herself, and this is probably a culmination of a lot of frustration and hurt that she's been experiencing recently. You know, we can just look at the recent episodes of the buildup of this resentment that she has. So it's a bit of a mystery because from the beginning, I think all of us thought that they both wanted to get married. They were both into it, including him. And then when it came to the wedding, suddenly he starts to act like a jerk face a little bit. He starts to hurt her feelings. He doesn't seem to care about that he's hurting her feelings. He says, this is your thing. And a lot of people are commenting below of like, I don't understand, because in the beginning, that was the whole reason why they were going to stay in the parents' house, is because he was saving up for a wedding. So in that instance, and she was like, no, I don't need to save up for a wedding. I want to move out. And he's like, but we need to save up for a wedding. So in those times, it seemed that he was very interested in having a lavish wedding, or at least a lavish enough wedding. And now that they're getting married, he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. He doesn't want to have to do anything with the dress, with the venue, with the guests, with the romantic aspects of the date, with the flowers. He doesn't want to have, romantic aspects of the date that they're actually getting married. And it's what's going on here. And I don't know. It's a bit of a mystery. There's a lot of hypotheses that we can say, and people in the comment section are hypothesizing. Is it because he's getting cold feet? Is it because he's worried now that he's going to have to move away from his parents and he doesn't want to do that, or he's worried about how his parents are going to react to that? Is it that he is upset because he doesn't like to be pressured by people? Another hypothesis, and this is total speculation, is that due to whatever issues he has, whatever personality issues, whatever defenses he has, they're probably not a part of his awareness structure. He actually inadvertently, but most decidedly, pushes other people into overfunctioning for him. He actually likes to be in the underfunctioner position. You'll hear me talk about this sometimes. There's also dependency. I'm actually publishing soon a deep dive on dependent personality disorder, and patrons of the podcast can listen to that. I talk in much more detail about that in a lot of the research. Anyway, so when you have those traumas, you will be very comfortable in the dependent position, in the underfunctioning position, in the position where you are clearly the incompetent one, you're clearly the wrong one, and someone else is the right one. And there's pros and cons to that. The pro to being in the dependent, underfunctioning position is that everyone else just takes care of everything because they just know they can't depend on you. The con to being in that position is that you feel incompetent and you don't feel like you matter in the world. But sometimes it's a price they're willing to pay because they really do not want to be responsible, because they're terrified of responsibility, because they're terrified of being incompetent. They're quite sure of themselves that if they attempt to take the risk of responsibility, they will absolutely screw it up. And given the way that Brandon was raised, there's a possibility that he suffers from at least some version of this. Again, there's no way for me to know based on a television show. But I have treated people like this before, and it does explain a lot of odd behavior. One of the big reasons why I got into psychology 26 years ago, 27 years ago, 25 years ago, 26 years ago, is because I was so intrigued by my own behavior that would shoot myself in the foot, by other people's behavior. Everyone just seemed so strange. We had all these intentions and all these goals in life, and so many of us would make mistakes psychologically. We would go into denial. We would be attracted to the wrong person. We would be in relationships that aren't very good for us, or we would be reactive to other people in ways that we would regret later. We would interpret things in very strange ways. And when you look into particularly the personality literature and the psychoanalytic and the psychodynamic literature, it tends to provide a model for understanding these things. And one of them is that when we're young and or schema therapy, listen, patrons have access to all my episodes on schema therapy, very helpful. We essentially, when we're not getting our needs met, we have to develop a schema or a way of seeing the world that explains and predicts why we're being treated the way that we are. Those schemas, they become maladaptive because we retain that point of view into our adulthood in situations that it doesn't really call for it. So, for example, some people are raised in a way that make them feel very incompetent and very out of control and very childish. So they're being treated in such a way of just like, oh, clearly I'm incompetent. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't express my anger. I need to depend on you to survive because you're telling me I'm incompetent. So I need someone to depend on. So I guess it's going to be you. And I'll just assume that I'm incompetent because if I assume that, then things usually go better for me given the circumstances that I'm under right now. Then you go into adult life and you just continue to assume I am incompetent and I need someone to depend on. And so what can happen is that when you are called a task of like, let's work together as a team, the underfunctioner will just reflexively underfunction and push the other person into a overfunctioning dominant role. When they were a child, it worked well because usually a parent was very comfortable in the dominant role. In fact, that's why the child had an incompetent schema to begin with, because the dominant person made sure that the child believed that they were incompetent. But once you go into adult life and you approach someone who doesn't want to overfunction, there will be a lot of frustration because you're reflexively becoming underfunctioning independent, and you're trying to push the other person into the dominant role, but the other person doesn't want to do that. They're like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? I don't know if that's what's happening, but it is an idea. Let's just keep that in mind as we watch. And as I always say, we're not actually trying to analyze them, because if they wanted help, they would go to a therapist. What we're trying to do is we're trying to learn about our own lives. We're not trying to replace therapy, but insight. And I know a lot of clinicians are watching as well. And so we're trying to understand how people work and the possibilities. So that's the only thing that we're doing as we're watching. But let's keep that in mind as we watch.
Last night, Julie and I got into a fight, and it's left questions. I need to know that, we're gonna get married and we're not gonna be fighting all the time like this, and that we're in a good place. So I kind of wanted to just get inside your head, see how you're feeling.
So this is great. He's starting it off really well. I doubt it's going to stay in that mode, but he is asking, at least on the surface, I just want to get inside your head. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know how you feel. So Julia is about to say, I'm angry at you, Brandon. Let's see if Brandon can really listen. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to think you're being unreasonable, but you got to start with validation, or you got to start with listening skills of like, okay, I hear you say that you're angry at me. Why are you angry at me? You want to reserve defensiveness for later because you want to make sure that someone feels understood. So let's see if Brandon can do that.
I'm angry at you, Brandon. Help me, 2 hands, Brandon, please, 2 hands. You have 2 hands.
So it's interesting that we are seeing at least a moment in which we have overfunctioner, underfunctioner, the overcompetent dominant one and the incompetent one, and how each role plays its part in keeping the other person in that role. So I'm just pointing that out. I don't know if we're seeing the beginning of a pattern or the continuation of a pattern where a dependent person is switching from one dominant person to the next, but let's continue watching.
Are you asking?
Because the other night, we kind of walked out on me. I don't know, we're gonna have fighting from time to time, I'm sure, but I just wanted to know how you felt about everything, and if you still 100% wanted to get married.
So this is going fine so far. They're not fighting. He is being curious. He's asking how she feels, but it's potentially still in the same mode that they are in frequently, where he isn't talking about his own feelings. He might not even know his own feelings. and he's mainly concerned with what she is feeling. So he's asking, do you want to marry me? But I think why he's asking that is because she's unsure if he wants to marry her because of the lack of effort and interest that he's taking in the wedding itself. So I'm guessing Julia's going to say, well, I should probably ask you that question given what's happening. And I think given his traumas, he has a really hard time answering those questions, either because it's too vulnerable or he actually doesn't even know how he feels, or he's so used to being in a mode of pleasing other people. Let's watch.
I angry and I said, you need to try change my mind. You need to try make me happy. And then marry does not mean we're not divorced after if we have more problem and not fix.
Okay, so she's saying, I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm sad, and you need to try harder. Okay, if I were there, I would ask her to elaborate on that because he would benefit from some specifics there. But, you know, she's communicating how she feels and taking ownership of her feelings. And I would have wished that he would have keyed in on that. It's just like, okay, what are you sad about? Or how can I help? Or something like that. But then she said, if we get married, it's not like divorce isn't an option. And now he is kind of shocked by that. Let's watch.
You threatening with divorce before you even gotten married?
I try to say what happened if we not stop, not hear each other.
That's a kind of a threat.
So we saw a similar reaction with Amira and Andrew, where she is simply saying, and maybe she does mean it as a threat, but at least verbatim what she's saying is, look, if things don't work out, then we can always get a divorce. What he is hearing is a threat. That's what he's saying, that if you don't shape up, then I'm going to divorce you. So now, one of the things that I learned early in my work with couples is, and I always left it up to the couples, but I would tell them from the beginning if they had this kind of issue, I would say, so let's talk about the D word, divorce. When you have strife and when you have conflict, it's normal at times for people to think about divorce, to say, why am I even with this person? I should leave this person. And then you make up, and then the divorce word, the D word, just completely goes away for another 5 months. And then you have another fight, and suddenly you're starting to think about it. You make up, and it goes away. So it's not unusual to have a temporary, seemingly very sure decision like, I'm done, and then later on say, oh, you know what, I was just in a really hurt mood in that moment and I wasn't thinking straight. Most of the time when things are going well, I'm not thinking about that. Now, there's certainly a lot of people who do think about divorce consistently and actually work with a lot of clients in that way as well. It takes a long time to make the decision usually. But anyway, so what I say to couples, because I learned from the beginning of my career, was to tell couples, look, you can think it, but only say it if you are sure that it is on the table. If you're thinking it and it's in the moment and you're in a conflict and you've only been thinking about it for the past 3 days or something, you might want to think about whether or not you want to broach the topic, because if you do, it can be very traumatic for the other person. For the other, even though in your mind you're thinking, well, I was just upset in the moment. But to say such a thing to the other person, it can really threaten their trust in you, and that can be very deleterious to your relationship. If they lose trust in you, they're less resilient, they're more suspicious, and all the bad things. So what I would tell people is like, be real careful. Of course, you can talk about divorce, you can talk about breaking up, it's your choice, but know that the impact on the other person might be far greater than what you think it's going to be. And I think this is one of those cases because, she's planning for the wedding, she wants to get married, and she's dropping the D word in there, and I don't know if it's helpful. I think that's all he heard. If she hadn't have said that, then it would have given the conversation a chance to actually focus on her feelings, which now they're talking about the divorce word.
If I not take care, she stay with me because she my wife. I don't need to give flower, I don't need to take care she. I don't need to say sweet words for she. She don't need, she my wife.
Have I not made any effort? Have I not tried? I think it's a double effort. It's teamwork.
Right. So we're having the same style of conversation we've had over the past few weeks, where he starts off seemingly well, but his intention probably wasn't really to hear her feelings and to validate her and to talk about his own feelings. Really what the agenda seems to be from him is, I'm going to be real calm and I'm going to ask you questions, but in the end, my message to you is you got to shape up. So one of the weird things about defenses and about personality is that when you're growing up and you're treated in a very dominant way and you're made to feel small and someone's talking down to you and controlling you emotionally, physically, you are very comfortable in a place of dependency. Not all the time, but you can develop this syndrome where you're very comfortable, almost too comfortable in a submissive place. The other thing about this is that you're also internalizing the whole relationship. You're not just internalizing yourself, but you're internalizing the other person, which means that you have the capability to be dominant and uncaring towards other people and self-centered around your own feelings. And so I don't know if that's what's happening right here, that he's simultaneously pushing her into an overfunctioning position while also talking down to her. I don't know if that's what's happening, but it's just an hypothesis. I'd be real curious. If I was there, I'd be really curious. I'd stop this conversation. I'd be like, Brandon, what's going on right now? What did she just say? How are you feeling? When she said the divorce word, how are you feeling? What's, more feeling talk from you, Brandon. Let's just, get away from what you're trying to manage in her. Just think about your own feelings. Because that could be another factor too, is that he's so desperate for closeness, as we all are, but he only has one mode of actually getting that closeness, is to be the underfunctioner that is very pleasing. And he is desperately wanting her to calm down so that he can retain a secure attachment. But he doesn't know how to navigate this kind of conversation because she's asking him to be a peer. She's asking him to be an equal, and he doesn't necessarily know how to do that. I don't know. It's total speculation. Let's continue watching.
There's times like these where it's frustrating, and then I backtrack and I take a breath and say, all right, yes, she's acting a little irrational, but just give her time. She'll calm down and she'll be okay.
Yikes. What? So they edit it, so it's hard to know what exactly he was saying, but from the looks of it, it's a very similar attitude and communication that he has towards her of, my fiance is an irrational, weird woman with all of her emotions, and I consider myself to be above that. I'm the better one. You see, it's interesting how on one hand, he pushes her into the overfunctioning role, but on the other hand, he's also considering himself, I don't know if it's the best word, but superior is a word of, she's this little creature with her emotions and I'm logical, and it's a defense against feeling inferior. Whenever you hear someone saying like, oh, my spouse is so irrational, now maybe they have an irrational spouse, but often it's an indication where someone feels irrational themselves. They feel inferior and they need a mechanism to elevate them so that they can feel somewhat better about themselves. And one way to do that, we know, is to push other people down.
If I talk to her about it and explain how I'm feeling, we always are able to resolve it. The important thing to me is that I'm marrying her because I love her.
Okay, so he says, I just have to tell her how I feel and it all works out. Well, we did, at least in the edited version of this, we didn't see him talk about how he felt at all. We've rarely seen him talk about how he feels. What I would imagine, what might be happening for in this moment is, I am feeling worried that we're not going to get married. I'm feeling worried that you judge me. I'm feeling hurt that you just talked about divorce. We don't hear him talking about that. We don't hear him saying any of those kinds of words. Now, maybe he's feeling those and thinking them, but at least he's not saying them, or at least they're not showing us those clips.
You may kiss your bride.
So at the beginning of the season, this couple seemed to have the most natural connection. They seemed like they genuinely loved each other. They had spontaneity with each other. They seemed compatible in a lot of ways. And as the season progressed, I became more and more worried about them. Now, I'm just a person on YouTube speculating they know a lot more about their relationship than I ever would. But I am worried about them, and I really hope that they don't run into problems that cascade and get worse and worse over time. Having said that, they have bounced back from some pretty big conflicts. So I'm just assuming that they either are resilient or they didn't take it to heart or they had a lot of conversations away from the camera that helped to resolve some of those issues or something. Because Julia, and by the way, they're pronouncing it Yulia, and I've been wondering that because I've known women from Russia named Yulia. It's spelled Julia to us Americans, but it is pronounced Yulia. And the whole season I was wondering, oh, it's interesting that she pronounced it Julia. So have we been mispronouncing it wrong this entire season? Like with the whole Azan thing or Azan thing? Anyway, Yulia seems to not be hesitating at all to want to get married. She seems to be very genuinely in love. She seems to be very genuinely sure that she wants to get married. It's very uncomplicated. And I'm wondering if the two of them just have a lot of strengths that maybe aren't in the realm of conflict resolution, but are in the realm of putting things behind you, moving forward, expressing love to each other, being nice to each other. You know, not everyone has to operate communication-wise in the way that I would prefer in order for the relationships to work out. So, at the very least, I'm happy to see that they're happy. I am worried about them, truly. But what do I know? I'm just watching a TV show on YouTube, but I am worried about them.
I not believe this is heaven.
It feels amazing. I've never been happier.
She cried. My mother cried too.
And kudos to the mom for seemingly navigating this transition in the way that I think all of us would hope that she would navigate it. She's sad to see her baby boy go, as she calls him, but she is also happy. You know, it's that bittersweet experience that I've been talking about from the beginning of the season that all parents go through when their children grow up and become married and move on with their lives. You love to see them grow up, but you also are sad to see them go. There's a part of you that wants to keep your child close to you for the rest of your life. There's another part of you that wants freedom. You know, there's a mixture of feelings, and so the mom seems to be navigating that really well. In the beginning of the season, it might have been hard for any of us to imagine that the mom would be happy in this moment. I didn't show the clip, but they did an interview with the mom, and she says, you know, that she was happy, but she was sad, and she was really glad that her son and Yulia would have this life together, and but he'll always be my baby boy. But I'm okay for the most part with him going, and there wasn't any kind of dominance in her vibe, any kind of anger or resentment in her vibe. She just seemed like a genuinely loving parent. So 2 thumbs up to the mom for managing this transition, I think, against a lot of issues for her. I think she has a lot of traumas, I'm guessing, from early childhood that are cropping up in this situation, and she's managing it very well.
We were there, and Pop-Pop was there. So this was just the warm-up to the full church one day down the road.
I think so.
My first grandchild getting married. We're very proud of it. And I'm sure he's going to be a very good husband.
I totally forgot about Pop-Pop. He was early in the season. I remember at first I thought that I really liked his, you know, how much of a straight shooter he was. But then he said some things, if I remember right, that were kind of creepy towards Yulia. I'm trying to remember what he said. But anyway, it's good to see his face again, I suppose. If you're not a patron of the podcast yet, you can do so now by going to patreon.com. When you become a patron of the podcast, you get access to hundreds of episodes that are only available to patrons. Our best episodes, our best audio episodes, are really only available to patrons. I do deep dives on various different personality disorders. A lot of the things that I allude to on these reaction videos, I go into much more detail on the deep dives. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.